It seems like, if you don't know any better, that all immigration is bad and all immigration is illegal. That's not the case.
There's 120 million forcibly displaced people in our world. 43.4 million are registered with the UNHCR. For this fiscal year, our government's commitment was to bring 125,000 of them here. To get on that list to actually come over here is a little like winning the lottery. What's the first thing you did when you got here? And she said, I went for a walk because I wanted to know what freedom felt like. When the kids come over here, even the ones that had the privilege of learning some English, everything is survival mode. So it's about that day. Okay, I got to make it through another day. I got to make it through another day. So there's no dreaming about the future.
Because the thing that you and I was born with, we didn't have to do anything for it. We just have it.
It's for granted.
You take it for granted. And do we even value it? Welcome to the Will Podcast. I am Will, where our mission here is to share with you wisdom, inspiration, leadership, and legacy. And today I am blessed and honored to have with me a very special guest, Mr. Barton Chelf with Beyond 90. Is it Beyond 90 Ministry or just Beyond 90?
Just Beyond 90.
Beyond 90. And I could begin to jump in and explain what it is, but I would like for you to do it because you're going to say it much better than I am. Tell me a little bit about the organization, what y'all do, why you do it, and who you do it for.
Yeah, outstanding. I appreciate that very much, Will. Thank you for having me. I think to explain a little bit, if you don't mind me telling my wife's and my story on how we got there, because it's what we learned along the way.
Yep.
So we were, go back a little more than 10 years ago now, we were just empty nesters minding our own business. And through a Christmas giving tree at our church, we grabbed one of those ornaments that said buy a gift, and we told the pastor that we'd be happy to help deliver those gifts, and we met our first refugee family delivering those gifts. And it just so happened that a week later we ran into that same family in Walmart, and they were inviting us back over for dinner. And so we started saying, okay, so tell us what a refugee is and tell us what your story is. And what we learned is, the refugees, to become a refugee, the legal terminology of refugee, you're forcibly displaced from your home. You can't go back. And so while you're in another country, you register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And that registration with the UNHCR gets you eligible to be vetted. That vetting process is then a 2 to 3 year vetting process that then gets you on a list to be resettled somewhere. You don't get to choose what country. You don't get to choose what part of the country. You just are on a list where you can possibly go someplace. To put that in perspective, right now, there's 120 million forcibly displaced people in our world. 43.4 million are registered with the UNHCR. And for this fiscal year, our government's commitment was to bring 125,000 of them here. So when you do the math on that, that's 1/4 of 1% of those that are in that registered as refugees. So, to get on that list to actually come over here is a little like winning the lottery.
Right.
I mean, because it's such a small number in there. But as my wife and I learned that 90 days was all that was available, we go, that's crazy. I couldn't pick up and move from here to California and be, self-sufficient in 90 days, not knowing people, not knowing connections there. And you expect someone who doesn't know our culture, doesn't know our language, to be self-sufficient in 90 days.
Right.
But that's how long the contract that the government sets for this. So as my wife and I saw that and got to know a couple of different families and saw the angst, the literal angst at the end of that 90-day period, we said, there's got to be more here. There's got to be better. So we were, as we prayed into what God would have us do there, we were both working downtown, living in a high-rise condo on the river here, downtown Jax, and we made the prayerful decision to sell that condo for my wife to quit her job. We moved into an apartment complex where they were placing refugees. So we just didn't feel like, going one night a week and on a Saturday could really connect and learn what was necessary and be able to serve well. So we made that decision. And so, just started getting known, in the evenings when I'd get home from work, we'd start walking the complex. It was a big complex, and, meet people at the mailbox or on their way to the dumpster or whatever, and there were over 50 refugee families in that. And so, my wife, I still worked because we still had bills. Still have bills, by the way.
Sure. They don't stop.
No, they don't stop. You can say, hey, I don't have income right now. Bill, they still come. But no, it's and so we got the privilege of knowing a lot of these families. We'd get invited for tea. We'd get invited for dinner. And then during the day, my wife might take one of the wives to a doctor's appointment while the husband was at work. might take we had a knock on the door one evening. The guy had gotten in an accident, and the police officer handed him the information and said, "You need to self-report. Here's the website." And he goes, "I don't even understand what that means."
Right.
And so, here I'm pulling up the laptop and sitting next to him, and we're self-reporting. So, we just, whatever needs that were there, we kind of learned to hang out somewhere near the mailbox because they'd have mail they didn't understand
Right.
and ask about it. So as we saw the need for that, and as we got known in the community, we would get knocks on our apartment door in odd hours of the day and stuff. Said, okay, we're happy to do that, but let's formalize this a little. So we became a 501c3 in February of 2017,
Mhm.
and still continued to serve from our apartment complex, and then opened up an office, just from a church on Spring Park Road that had some old Sunday school rooms that weren't being used.
Mhm.
Rented out a little 400 square feet, and my wife was there 3 days a week for walk-in, and just and people knew they could come, and she'd take care of them. And so that was our small beginnings.
Okay.
And so those needs, so the Beyond 90 piece of what we do right now, and it is just a piece of what we do Monday through Thursday from 10 to 4, is walk-in support. Whatever you need, you bring it to us, we'll take care of. Friday's an admin day for our staff. And in 2021, we merged a local nonprofit where the founder was retiring underneath us. And so now we're also the only refugee-focused mental health provider in Northeast Florida. So we do refugee mental health as well, have a full-time clinician. And we have 3 interns right now from local colleges that come work alongside in that endeavor as well.
That is absolutely amazing, and that's surrendering your life and accepting the call that God has placed on your heart
Yeah,
to do something that, from the world perspective, it's not glamorous. It's not going to be. There's no fame. There's no wealth. There's no riches.
no,
There's none of that. But to meet the needs of His created people.
exactly.
And I love what you said. We sold what we had so we could go live in the same place. I talk about it often. Like that is the biblical description of discipleship.
Yep.
Is we can't truly help. I can give you some food, but if I go away, I need to show you how to cook it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's in general terms, but that is such amazing to see. It's like, okay, no, we want to get here. We want to do life with you, right? That's a famous, church phrase,
Mhm.
nowadays, but that's what you and your wife have done is shown how to do that. And that's absolutely amazing. And
Well,
before we
if you
go,
if you don't mind me stopping there,
yeah, please.
I don't feel like that should be amazing. I feel like that should be normal.
You're not wrong.
And
You're not wrong.
and because and it's like, they say we didn't do this and don't do it for any accolades for anybody to say, "Wow, I could never do that." Well, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, that verse that says, "Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice."
Yep.
Do you believe it?
Right.
What's that mean for you? It's going to look different for you than it does for me, but what's that
Absolutely.
mean for you?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. We're all called, to love people as ourselves, which is complicated, and most people, especially Americans, don't value their own life, don't value
Yeah.
themselves, and get so caught up into the things of this world that keeps them distracted. So when you start saying things like offering your body as a living sacrifice, like whether you're running a nonprofit or you're running a ministry, a church, you're a lawyer, you're a candlestick maker, whatever it is, like each and every day to surrender your life to God and allow God to use you in whatever capacity you're in for His glory. That's what He's going to do. And there's a whole different, we talk joy, right?
Right.
We don't talk about happiness. We talk
Right.
about joy, right? Because, to be able to do things that should be more common, it does bring a lot of joy. I spend a lot of time helping people that are in or coming out of various addictions and different things like that. And why? Because I have a background there. I used to be addicted to alcohol and other things. And coming out of that has given me the experience to understand and relate and be able to help people go from A to B. But in order to do that effectively, I have to be in proximity.
Right.
While you've never been a refugee, getting yourself in the proximity of of the people that are has given you a different perspective,
Absolutely.
and you said it was 2017.
That we officially formed the 501c3.
Okay. So let's talk for a second, because we just had inauguration day.
Mhm.
We have a new president, and one of the talking points for the last 20 years, at least in politics, has been immigration. But there is a push in that narrative where it's only it don't it seems like, if you don't know any better, that all immigration is bad and all immigration is illegal, and that's not the case.
Absolutely.
So describe so the definition of a refugee. What does it take for an individual to show up here? You pick them up from the airport and you help them. How did they get to the airport at
Yeah.
JIA?
And if you don't mind me expanding on your question a little bit and
Please.
just talk about all the pathways so that the terminology you hear that might be incorrect, you know and understand that.
Mhm.
So the southern border is obviously in the news day in and day out. It
Right.
has been for several years. It was on the highlight, through the entire, presidential process because it was talked about all the time.
Right.
And so the southern border has basically two different types of people that come to that: asylum seekers and the undocumented. The
Mhm.
undocumented are sneaking across and just trying to find their way without any level of checking in with the government, without anything else, and those do create problems because they can't legally work. And so there are some huge challenges within that. But the asylum seekers that are coming to the southern border are trying to do things the right way. And so they come and they check in with the Border Patrol or what other agencies are, depending on where they come across, and they request asylum, which is the right in any country to request an asylum in the country. And so then they are given, um, most of the time, they're given a phone so they can be contacted. It's just a little flip phone. It has almost no value to it, but it's so they can be contacted. And they're told they will be set up with a court date where they can present their cause for why they feel like asylum should be granted to the judge, and the judge can either say no and you have to go back, or yes, welcome to the country. And that is a lengthy process because there's so many of them. And then you also have the people that are that we serve with, the refugees, are the ones that I mentioned that are registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. That registration gives them refugee status.
Mhm.
And that status is what, like I said, once they've been fully vetted, then they're on the list to come over here. I mentioned a couple minutes ago that our government for the year committed to 125,000 of those. Well, there's 10 resettlement agencies in the country that share those 125,000. And they have offices all around the country. So they all will report to the State Department and say, I can take 10,700 of those with the capacity I have in my offices around the country. And they'll say done. And they'll get that with each of those 10 agencies. And then those agencies will share those refugees as they come in with each of their offices.
Mhm.
And that is what we are, one of those offices here
Right.
in Northeast Florida. So our commitment for this year is 150 total refugees, which will represent somewhere between 40 and 50 families.
Okay.
And so they will be, we will get an email and what country they're from, what languages they speak, and then we'll get an email that says travel has been booked for, and then all of a sudden there's all the flight information. You see, oh, they're coming in 12 days, and their flight lands at 9 in the evening. So we've got those 12 days to go find an apartment for them, to furnish that apartment, to go grocery shopping, fill the pantry, fill the refrigerator, and then we literally go pick them up at the airport.
Mhm.
And that's the second half of what we do, by the way. That's called First 90 because we just started that in our first family in January 24. So that just started a year ago. We got permission from the State Department to be in that mix for that.
Okay.
And so then we're responsible for that family for the first 90 days for all their doctor's appointments, getting the kids enrolled in school, getting them Florida IDs, getting them tested for ESOL and into English classes if they don't have good English yet. And we do 10 hours of what's called cultural orientation, where we teach them how the country works.
Mhm.
How do you know when to go to your primary care versus the urgent care versus an emergency room?
Can I take that?
It's well, a lot of Americans should take that. I'm telling you, it's funny because our usually have volunteers that teach that, and we'll get a volunteer to come out and go, I learned a lot.
Sure.
And so, yeah, but we talk about food safety. We talk about, if something in your apartment isn't right, how do you get that taken care of? And just, the common things that, for the most part, we take for granted. And just as a funny side note, when my wife and I moved to before we moved into that apartment complex, and one of the families that really struck us, that got started this was a mom and her twin sons from Ethiopia, and the boys were 21, and mom didn't speak any English, and the boys had some passable English, and so we go over there after work one day just to check on them, and they point at the microwave and they say, "What is that?" And my wife says, "Do you have any leftover food? It's for warming up leftover food." They said, "Oh, yes, we made spaghetti yesterday." And said, "Well, let me show you how that works." They opened up the cabinet underneath the sink, and there was a pot of spaghetti and a pot of sauce because they didn't know what the refrigerator was.
Yeah.
They had never, I mean, they had lived in a refugee camp for over a decade, no power, no running water. I mean, the things, like I said, that are so normal for us.
Right.
And so just the common household equipment, the appliances that we're used to, they're looking at it, go, "What do I do with that?"
Yeah.
And the other funny part of that was mom points up at the smoke detector and goes, "Woo, woo." And he said, "That go off?" And yeah,
Yeah.
she's nodding her head going, "Yeah, it did." So, just, like I said, just simple things like that. But then that family for us was a huge realization of what the need was for some of these families, and, and how to, the road they had in front of them. And you couldn't accomplish being self-sufficient here in 90 days with that deficit coming into the
No,
country.
no, not at all. And so the individual that has went through the vetting process and has been given refugee
Mhm.
status, they're not coming from Paris,
No.
right? So they're coming. You said 140 million.
Well, there's 120 million that are forcibly displaced from their countries,
Okay.
43.4 million that are registered with the UNHCR.
Okay. So of those that are registered, can you what's the list of top 4 or 5 countries that these individuals are coming from?
Good question. And Afghanistan, partly because of the manner in which our government pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021.
Sure.
Any of the Afghan individuals who worked alongside our government and served them are in that list, and
Mhm.
they're most of them are hiding from the Taliban in one way or another. Some of them have gotten out of country, and some are still in country. And so we try to serve as many, as a nation, we've tried to serve as many Afghans as possible in that, which is the least we can do. They were there serving us.
Absolutely.
And but a lot of there's a lot of turmoil in the Latin American countries: Colombia, Guatemala, Venezuela, Nicaragua, in that area, but also the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which I just saw in the news this morning. There's some more unrest over there
Mhm.
in one of their larger cities, and thousands fled overnight.
Right.
Thousands fled from the country, from the city overnight, and so the DRC gets a lot over there. South Sudan, Eritrea, or Eritrea. I've heard both, and I don't know which one's right. and and Myanmar, the Burmese people in
Mhm.
Myanmar have had. It's really hardly ever been in the news, but there's been ongoing conflict there for years and years and years, and so that's not an unusual place. And then some of the smaller countries too, but Syria, Iraq also. So I mean, and
Yeah.
it's an unfortunately large list. It just tells
Yeah.
you how much conflict there is in the world.
Yeah. What did you say? 58 developed nations are currently, or undeveloped nations are currently in conflict of some level.
Well, we've served people from 58 different
Okay,
countries,
58.
and so that and that means there's turmoil in at least those
And at
58
least
different
those
countries
58.
because they wouldn't have become refugees if it weren't
Sure.
for conflict
Yeah.
in there. And we have a map in the wall in our office where we have a push pin in every country that we've served somebody, and it's a twofold reminder. The first reminder is all the people we've had the privilege of serving.
Mhm.
The second reminder is much more sobering. It's all the places there's conflict in the world,
Yeah.
and that's hard.
And that, so I served in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002 with the United States Marines, and just to follow what happened, with that particular conflict over the 2 decades that followed it, and then to see the withdrawal. I mean, I know lots of guys that did full careers and were just devastated. One by like, why did we do that? That's not what we're talking about
Right.
today, but why were we there for so long just to leave? Was my most of my adult life wasted? And then there's the other piece, the the relationships that were built with the locals, to
Mhm.
just abandon those people and leave them in such a fast way with little to no
Yeah.
resources left behind. And so, me, just the way my brain works, if I'm Afghani, I don't trust Americans,
Yeah.
right? Um, but they still want to come here,
Yeah.
um,
Because
and
it's safe,
because it's safe. It's because
and we
it's
hope it always
safe.
will be.
We hope so. We hope so. And a lot of a lot of people would make the case. It's a poor case of, well, if you don't like the way things are, fix it. And this is coming from a nation where we are a free society,
Mhm.
and most of our citizens don't even vote,
Right,
right?
that's crazy.
And it's a different, you get a different perspective of the world. And I was young. I
Yeah.
was, 19, 20, 21 years old. And when you see, that there is no rule of law, there's rule by the barrel of a gun. And to be able to flee that,
Mhm.
because not everybody wants to pick up, and then you don't have the resources
Right.
to, when you take a country like Afghanistan, where you have all of these funds and resources that are flowing in from other entities and other organizations outside. The villager who just wants to raise his goats and keep his family safe, he doesn't have access to the types of things that he would need to be able to defend his homeland,
Right.
right? We're big Second Amendment here in the United States, right? Oh, you ain't coming into my house, right?
Yeah.
But what if 1,000 people came to your village and came to your neighborhood and just did, so to be able to step up like you and your wife have done and opened up, your hearts and your lives to be able to be a vessel for God to use to show the love of Jesus, right? We're not talking about showing the love of the United States, but show the
Yeah.
love of
Right.
Jesus to these individuals. It's amazing.
I'm Scott DeVore with DeVore Capital. We are a multi-service construction, real estate, and development company. We do services from ground-up development to roofing services to real estate transactions. Reach out to us at 8444-DEVORE or at the website link below.
Do you want to talk about January 20th,
Um,
Inauguration Day, and how
yeah,
things have
I mean,
changed?
yeah, I mean, it's a reality.
Right.
It's not an easy reality
Yep.
right now, and I will be the first person to stand at the front of the line saying that our southern border has been broken, and I don't know how to fix it.
Sure.
But some control needs to be had there. So
Absolutely.
I am not an open borders person.
Yep.
I know they exist. I don't quite understand, but that's okay. I'll love to sit down and have a chat with somebody who believes that way and listen to them, because I'm open minded. But I believe that we need to know who's coming into our country, and that being the free country that we are, that was founded on um, immigrants. I mean, we are the true melting pot. There's no other nation in the world that is what we are in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And just to abandon that would seem really, really wrong. But that, I mean, that's just so to answer your question. I
Yep.
wanted to preface with that. But so on Inauguration Day, somewhere amongst the nearly 200 executive orders was an executive order that was pausing new arrivals. So the families that are fully vetted and been waiting for years and years and years, uh, you know, the executive order said that'd be paused for 90 days and reevaluated in that 90-day period, and then either put off for another 90 days or reopened again. And so it was like, okay, that's slightly annoying, but if you want to look at it and make sure it's right and make sure it's healthy, and then open it back up with some tweaks to make it better, I'm all for that.
Sure.
I got nothing against it, but so that was, like I said, an annoyance when, to take what you're doing and know that you're shut down for 90 days or I shouldn't say, we're still serving the people that just came in. So we
Right.
got people that we're taking care of, but no new families in that 90-day window. And then last Friday, the State Department sent an email to all the agencies that do what we do around the country and issued a stop order.
Mm-hmm.
And that stop order said that we weren't to provide any more services. Well, you can tell me that you're not going to fund those services, and I'm okay with that. but you're not going to tell me to abandon the people.
Right.
And so we have made a commitment that we will serve those people, that, that family that came on, that family from Afghanistan that came in on the 20th.
Right.
We will find a way to pay their rent, to pay their utilities, to give them food until their work authorization comes in,
Mm-hmm.
until they have the ability to take care of themselves. We are not going to abandon them in that, but we will no longer be provided the resources through the contract that was, the contract started October 1st, goes through September 30th. So, the contract that exists, is, one-sidedly stopped.
Yeah.
And, so we won't get the resources that were promised to take care of those families
Mm-hmm.
that were brought here by the government. and, and I will mention one other thing just real quick, because there is this perception that there's all this money that flows towards them. The money that's given for 90 days is the tightest budget in the world. I mean, you wouldn't believe how tight that is. And once they've been here 6 months, they get the bill and have to start paying back their airfare that brought them here. So even the airfare that brought them here wasn't free.
It's not a gift.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
a gift. It was like I said, it's a deferred payment on that. But if you brought a family of 6 over here and you've done international travel,
Mm-hmm.
some of those bills they get are $10,000 and $12,000 and $14,000.
Right.
And but I mean, it's and they're okay with that because of how much it means for them to be here.
Right.
But so to have those families here and made that promise to them and have the rug get pulled out from under their feet really is a hard place. And it, for these families that have been through so much, they really should feel safe and at rest and at peace here. And that's our goal of when we deal with them is to handle them in a manner that adds to that peace and that comfort. And now they're coming with that. Am I safe? Can I leave my home?
Mm-hmm.
Can I? And it's like there's the anxiety and the fear that's in the community is really hard right now.
Well, President Trump, one of the many things that he said was, we're going to bring back common sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't seem to me like a very common sense approach when human lives are at stake
Mm-hmm.
to bring people over with a commitment for 90 days to then stop it.
Yeah.
I understand. You want to pause? Okay. No more human beings are allowed to come for a period of time. Okay. I get that. But the ones that are here, we have an obligation to keep our commitment to, especially in countries like Afghanistan, where we, in one way or another, it might not have been a signed contract on a piece of paper, but we made a commitment that we were going to take care of you.
Yep.
And any time you decide to put, uniformed military personnel on the ground, like you're making that, like we're here to save you, right?
Yeah.
The red, white, and blue is coming, and you're going to be fine. And then we left, and they weren't fine, and they were actually worse than before. So then to come here, okay, now I can be safe, I'm okay, and then we pull the rug out again and say, okay, hey, no, we're not going to keep our commitment again. Like that's hard. That's brutal. It just doesn't seem like a common sense approach. And we could debate for hours as to, what the right way to do things would be. And we didn't make those decisions. So, but like you said, you can't tell me to abandon these people.
No,
So
exactly.
I'm not going to.
And we're not going to.
Yeah.
And another thing, just as a side note worth noting, is refugees are on a 5-year path to citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So they do become, and if you ever get the opportunity, and I don't know if you've ever been to a naturalization ceremony where people become citizens, if you ever get the opportunity to go to one, absolutely go. I mean, to go there, we've been there because we've been invited by some of our refugee friends, and to see 40 or 50 or 60 people there from 20 or 30 countries that literally are crying because they just became citizens.
Right.
I mean, that are just it means so much to them. And then a comment you made earlier about not voting, when they find out they're able to vote, it is just like this amazing thing to them. And they are so happy to be able to take part in that process and trust that process because of the way most of their countries, things were rigged and you didn't have a say in that. And
Right.
so I would, heartily encourage anybody to go to one of those and just it changes your outlook.
Because the thing that you and I was born with,
Yep.
we didn't have to do anything for it.
Yep.
We just have it. And I think too often, because if we didn't have to work for it, if you didn't have to earn it,
It's for
yeah,
granted. You take
you
it for
take
granted.
it for granted. And do we even value it? And what's could you share a story or two of what it looks like for someone to get here from wherever in the world?
I will. A couple of stories come to mind.
Because you're not flying first class on
No.
Delta.
Well, and and the whole process there. So now I will readily tell you here, and I'll pull the card out of my wallet if you want me to. I am a card-carrying member of the Grown Man Crybaby Club. So when something hits my heart, it happens. So I'm just going to warn you ahead of it. But there is, all kidding aside, there's a young lady from Africa that petite girl. I mean, maybe $110 on her days when she packs all her winter clothes on her. I mean, she's a petite young girl, and found out that the military was coming and grabbing all the teenage girls and conscripting them into the military from her area. And she knew that that didn't always end well for the girls in there, because it wasn't always to carry a gun.
Right.
And so she and some of her friends started hiding, but knew they couldn't hide successfully for very long. And so they decide they need to flee. And so their path to flee to get to Egypt, which is where they were headed, was across a desert that in normal conditions on foot would be a 3-week trek across the desert. Because they were not wanting to get caught, they traveled only at night, and then they had to find places along the way to hide. So it ended up being a 3-month trek. And so she gets to Egypt and applies with the UNHCR, but in that time, they didn't have finding work as someone coming in like that doesn't happen very easily. So no money to speak of, and so just living in in not the best of circumstances, and then 7 years later she gets permission to travel over here. So so we asked her the question as she arrived. We said, just curious, what's the first thing you did when you got here? And she said, I went for a walk because I wanted to know what freedom felt like. And it's like, when you have that conversation with somebody who at age 24 did not have a moment in their life of ever feeling free.
Right.
And, and she said, I went for a walk because I wanted to know what it felt like. And, it just, if that doesn't hit you a little bit right there. And then one other story, a family that fled their city in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they fled to Uganda, and they're in a refugee camp of 100,000 people in a camp, a tent city, a massive tent city. And one corner of the camp was where the office was when they needed to check in or go through a vetting appointment, or, in that 2 to 3 year vetting process. If they ask you questions on, year 1, and you ask the same questions in year 3 and you get different answers, you're not vetted. You're done. It is. But then once you're through with the vetting process, every couple of months, they would post on the bulletin board outside the office, they would post the list of all the people who just got permission to travel. And so word would spread through this 100,000 people in there, and they would crowd around the office to see if their name was on it this time. And of course, most of them would turn away. There might be 400 or 500 names on there from 100,000 people.
Right.
So, it's like they're just pushing and shoving to get to the front to see if this is the time my name is on that. And so you talk about hope deferred. You've got that hope. Is it going to be this time? Is it going to be this time? And then it's not there. Right. And so then you find out a couple months later, they post it again. And so you rush up there again. How about this time? How about this time? 17 years he waited, checking every couple of months, looking for his name. And, and he even had gotten to the place where he wasn't even wanting to go check anymore.
Sure.
And so, and that day that he found out his name was finally on there, he and his wife had 6 kids. All 6 of them were born in that refugee camp. And so now it's permission to travel. And it's like he doesn't even know what to do with himself.
Right.
I mean, but I just, as I try to put myself in the shoes of these stories that you hear, I can't imagine pinning your hopes on a name being on a bulletin board and 17 years of looking for that before you find it.
Right.
And I mean, I just, the stories like that, as we hear them, are the ones that just, and even then coming over here is a huge opportunity for them now. But, they got one of their oldest was a high school age wise, was a high school freshman. His education was in the camp and is minimal at best. He learned a few English words, but he barely wrote his own home language. And he gets put into a high school based on his age. Well, how are you going to take beginner level algebra in 9th grade when you never learned math?
Right.
And so, I mean, it's like so even though for the family, now they're over here and they're safe and it's a good place for them and they're thrilled to be here, it doesn't mean it's easy.
It just gets started.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you're, and I don't know a better word, but it's like a purgatory. Like you sit in this camp for so long, just waiting for something else, and now it's like, okay, now life can start because everything is frozen in time there.
Exactly.
You're not traveling. There's no vacations. This is just where you are. Yeah. You can't go home.
Yeah, and the perspective of that too, when you look at, and when the kids come over here, even the ones that had the privilege of learning some English, everything is survival mode. So it's about that day. Okay, I got to make it through another day. I got to make it through another day. So there's no dreaming about the future.
Right.
I mean, you ask somebody here, what's your 5-year goal? What's your 10-year goal? Where do you want to be? And, so when an American meets one of these families and they've got their kids, they do the thing you do. What do you want to be when you grow up? They've never thought about it. They didn't know they had choices.
Sure.
And so it's like they usually will answer just what they think is cool, a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman. But, I mean, those, the doctor and the lawyer's not available to them when they don't, when they're going to be lucky to graduate high school.
Right.
And it's but they've never had the opportunity to even think about a future. Mm-hmm. And that just is foreign to us.
Sure. Yeah. No, whether you're the wealthiest or the poorest child born, if you're born here, you're ingrained with you can be whatever you want to be. Most people, at least you're told that, or at some point you believe that. It may be a pipe dream for some, but or it may be want to be an astronaut, and then NASA closes the space program. So then you can't be that anymore. But just to have the ability to dream and just to think of I know, and it's different, but I know what it was like to come back home from a third world country, right? So I knew what freedom was like, and then I was able to see and experience and witness what it's not, and then to come back home and not to relate them at all, but how that young lady felt. I wanted to go for a walk to feel like, what it is to be free, just to be able to come back home where we have our problems and we have our challenges, but I could walk down the street without fear of being shot at, or
conscripted in the military,
I joined voluntarily and I didn't have to. And then when my time was up, I could have stayed longer or I got out. And but this is the thought that hit me when you shared her story. Mm-hmm. There was some emotion that was right, but it wasn't uncommon. This like her story.
No, it's
right.
not.
And to hear that there are, I have 4 daughters. Okay. And to know that in 2025 there are major pockets of society as a whole where a young lady has no value other than right, and it just happens every single day, and it's so terribly sad and depressing. And then, but also on the other side, that it is so common, it's almost like desensitized to it to a certain degree, which is heartbreaking for me.
A couple positive things that I would like to point out.
Absolutely, we're going to go there.
Did you have the opportunity to interact with many families while you were in Afghanistan, or not really at all?
Not many. We at the time were and I guess I could probably share this. So the CIA was paying locals to
Okay.
do jobs.
Okay.
So it was usually, they use the term military age male quite frequently. So it was usually military age male and older. Didn't interact with a whole lot of women and children,
Okay.
except for they had the big outside brick ovens,
Yeah.
and they would make bread.
Okay.
To
Yeah.
this day, the best bread.
The non-bread.
The bread that's
Yeah.
the non-bread, the unleavened, right?
Yeah. I see.
The bread that if you ever have an opportunity to eat handmade, fresh Afghani bread,
hmm It's excellent.
it's absolutely
So,
amazing. So they had some ladies would do that,
okay.
but no eye contact.
Yeah.
No,
So,
there's
and my reason for asking is one of the things that we've learned from almost every one of these cultures, almost without exception, is they do a better job of building community than most Americans do.
sure.
They are more hospitable.
Yep.
I mean, we would get invited over to these homes for dinner when my wife and I were living in that apartment complex, and the way they made their meal, our meal was a better meal than their meal.
hmm
I mean, sometimes everybody was eating the same thing,
Yep.
but they went and got a delicacy to serve us
hmm
while they ate whatever ordinary they normally ate on there. It's like, no, no, no. I mean, why? It's
You were a
like,
guest.
yeah, and we were
Yeah.
a guest. And so the level of hospitality and community that comes, we could learn a lot from them because, some of the Middle Eastern countries pride themselves on their level of hospitality. I mean, if you're a guest in my home, I will protect you. I mean, it is a serious thing to be a guest in someoe's home in most of these communities, and to be even invited over for tea or invited over for a meal is an honor.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the way that they treat it.
Yep.
And like I said, and we get it. It doesn't really mean that much to us over here to
Yeah.
to be invited. So, and the other thing I wanted to share, if you don't mind me looking up a verse real quick,
Please.
there is from the kingdom perspective, because that is, I mean, yes, we want to be obedient to the things that the Lord puts on our heart and the things we chase after, but what's the eternal significance to what you do?
hmm
Why do what does it mean to the people? And waiting for my Bible app to come up, and it's slow to come up, but Acts 17, 26 and 27, I'm going to end up with a paraphrase if this doesn't come up here. And my paraphrase would be close. Okay, so I got her here. And so Acts 17, 26 and 27 basically is talking about how from one man, God made all the nations.
hmm
And he says, from one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. Okay, he marked out their times in history and the boundaries of lands. But why did he do that? That's what verse 27 says. He says, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, because he is not far from any one of us. So when you look at the tragedies that are in the world, there are people that are coming into our country through these tragedies that missionaries would have never gotten to,
Sure.
that would not have ever heard the gospel, but because they won that lottery ticket of being selected as a refugee to be resettled in our country, they have the opportunity now to hear the gospel, to hear the good news, to spend eternity with Christ that wasn't there in their home country.
hmm
I mean, when you see that, that God ordains the nations and the boundaries of their lands and why this country moves that way and that way, and it's we see that conflict and we go, there's some stupid people fighting wars for stupid reasons out there, and that's my opinion. and then, but you look at what the verse that says God can make good out of all circumstances.
Sure.
In there, there are people coming here that by having gone through what they did in their home country that caused them to end up here, have the chance to hear the good news of the gospel. And that chance was not available to them in their home country.
Yep.
So, the Great Commission, go out into all the world, make disciples of all nations. Well, not everybody is called. We were talking about missions, before we started this. Not everybody's called to go on the mission field.
Right.
But you know what? The Great Commission is still your deal, whether you're called to be in the mission field or not. Well, you can make disciples of all nations without leaving Jacksonville.
You got to go far.
You don't have to go far. And if you want to know where they are, go to the DMV. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah. Well, to that point, not everyone is called to sell the beautiful condo with the nice view and do what you did, but everybody is called to do something.
To do something, exactly.
Everybody is called to do something.
And I'm not laying out there saying that you should do that. I had my wife and I get opportunities to speak at times, and after one of the opportunities we had where we were sharing, guy came up afterwards and he's like, and I'm not sure, I think he meant it as a compliment, but I'm not sure. He goes, I could never do what you guys are doing. And I looked at him and I kind of shocked him in my answer. I said, good. Yeah. And he kind of gives me this look. And I said, because that means God's got something else for you.
Absolutely.
You don't see yourself doing this. And I'm okay with that. But this is what I've been called to do. You're called to serve the homeless. You're called to do, to love on kids in kids' church. I mean, do it.
I am Will with DCRE, DeVore Capital Real Estate. We want to help you with your buying and selling real estate transactions. We know in the economy and the market that we have today, everybody is telling you that it is impossible to buy or to sell. We know that we can get the deal done. Give us a call at 844-4DeVore or hit the link below. Have a great day.
You may very well just be called to help someone like you do what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Paul wrote about those that were helping him continue his mission. Right. And I think sometimes especially in North American Christianity, we take things to the extreme, right? There's the poverty camp, and then there's the extreme prosperity camp, right? There's like, all right, well, if you're a believer in Jesus, you should have nothing. Or if you're a believer in Jesus, you should pray for a Maserati and it shows up next week, right? Yeah. Like both of those inherently have flaws in the thought process. But it's, what are you doing today to bring him glory? Is that in your business? Is that in your ministry? And then how are you living out that Great Commission? How are you just start with loving people? And that's why I love what you said about just culturally, so many other people groups from other places, the way that they do family and the way they do life and the way they are able to come here. We talked about it off camera, where a family can come here and can get a $16, $17 an hour job, and they can pay their bills. They can get the needs met, and they still have left over to send home to those that weren't able to leave, at times. And I've met, especially we talked about, folks, I've met some individuals just being in construction that have came from Central America primarily. And to watch how they are able to build their families up and support one another. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell this one story of this one family. They came here legally. They went through the right process. They got a small apartment. And they all went to work. And then they needed a car. So they bought one car that was big enough for all of them. They paid cash. None of this $70,000 car loan thing, And then they built, then they all continued to go to work. And then they saved the money. And then they bought another one. And then okay, cool, now it's time to get a house. And then we're going to get another house. This one family, they've been in the country 15 years. Last I checked in on them, they owned 7 pieces of real estate, 3 businesses, multiple cars, and they have absolutely zero debt.
Yep. It can be done.
They just worked with each other. Yeah. They've and again, this isn't a wealth building seminar, but this is if we truly loved one another enough to where we wanted to be around each other enough to where we could work together. Just think of the good that could be done on a grand scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you don't mind a quick story, that's funny story from a refugee that came here in 99. And he spoke at our most recent fundraising dinner that my wife and I had in November. And absolutely a fascinating gentleman in there. But he tells a story. He and 4 other people from his home country of Sudan, their families, all 5 of their families came here within a month of each other. All 5 got put in the same apartment complex. And it happened that they got all 5 of the men jobs working the same place. Mm-hmm. So they're taking the bus to work every day and coming back home, and they decided that they were setting aside money every month so they could collectively buy a car, just like what you were talking about. That's what reminded me of the kid you were talking about. And so these 5 families go and buy a car. 5 of them went to take their driver's license test. 1 passed, and so he was the one that they put the car in his name. And so they were taking that car to go to the grocery store, So they would, because it was hard to get, so they would all five pile in the car. They go buy their groceries and load the car up, and then, and then one day after they've had this car a couple months, they decided we should, we don't need to take the bus anymore to work. We can take the car to work. This is before GPS. Remember, we haven't always, as much as it's a staple in our society, we haven't always had it. And so they decide, well, how do we get to work? Well, we follow the bus. And so they park the car next to where their bus stop was. The bus pulls up. When the bus leaves, they follow it. The bus stops, they stop. The bus goes, they go. The bus stops, they stop. The bus goes, they, on this way to the work there. And so the bus driver gets nervous and he calls the cops. And so, a couple blocks later, the cops pull him over, and these guys are, like now it's like, well, the police just pull over. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And so police officer, who thankfully was a very good natured man and was willing to listen. And there's so many good police here too.
Absolutely.
That absolutely and so he says, well, do you know why I pulled you over? No, sir. No, sir. We were not speeding. And he says, but you were following this bus closely. And he said, well, why were you doing that? And they explained that it was their first time taking the car to work. and the police officer got a good chuckle out of that and said, where do you work? And so they told him where he worked. And he said, I know where that is. He said, I will lead you there. He says, you follow me. And he said, based on what he knew, he says they were 15 or 20 minutes away from getting to work as the bus flies.
Yeah.
And the police officer got him there in 5.
Yeah.
and he says, he said that it is, that story represents, it's a funny story to tell now, but it tells you some of the struggles that you go through when you don't know and you don't understand.
Right.
And, and it is the other brief comment he made. It's funny. He goes, when I first got here, he says, I thought something in your sky was different because all these people would say, what's up? And I'd look up and there was nothing.
It is just the little things that we do. And I want to say I've been to 13 or 14 different nations.
Right.
And some of them developed, some of them not quite. And everywhere is different.
Yeah.
There's similarities, but everywhere is different. And if you do not speaking English, we have a benefit when we travel abroad.
Right.
It is the dominant language in most places. You could probably get by. But there are places that I have been where if they did speak English, they weren't speaking it with me.
Yeah.
Because, I'm an outsider.
Yeah, exactly.
It's different. And it's easy to be taken advantage of. It's easy, for that to happen. So, people to come and, the ability to be free, to have joy, to be able to experience what it's like to go to sleep at night without worrying about being snatched out of, it's amazing, what y'all are doing, and prayerfully you will continue to do it for many years to come. And hopefully somebody sees this and hears this and they want to get involved and help out one way or another. So
we welcome volunteers. We got a lot of church partners, but we welcome, we need those church partners too. The volunteers, we are blessed to be able to have 8 full-time staff members and a part-time staff member, and we have interns that work with us. But if we, but because of volunteers, we can do so much more than that.
Yeah.
And we do a couple fun things, by the way, a year. We do a back-to-school giveaway that's always fun. We do that in late July, and we've done. December was our 5th annual Refugee Christmas party. And, with the partners that came alongside us there, 359 kids came to that, and every child got 3 toys. The first 120 families were there, got a $50 Walmart gift card. Episcopal High School brought their photography club there, and they took family photos with a nice Christmas backdrop, and they
awesome.
printed them out right there on the spot and had a nice sleeve to drop them in. So they left with family photos. We had live music and a clothing giveaway. And so, we do things that can be fun like that too. And we look forward to those because for us, there's no agenda there. There's not a task we have to do. There's not we can have conversations with our refugee friends a lot easier when there's not somebody else behind them waiting for us to take care of them right after that.
Yeah. And that's the hard part about serving people is there's always somebody that's next, and I try very hard to make sure that it's not just like a turnstile.
Yeah.
Can I be intentional with you? Long enough to let you know that I really care before we move on to the next person. And that's hard.
And that's why, to work in an organization like ours, if you don't care about the people.
Yeah.
If you don't have these people are made in the image of God the same as I am.
Mm.
God loves them, and so I'm going to love them too. If you don't have that heart towards the people, you won't last long in it.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not, like you said earlier, it's not glamorous.
Right.
It's not, it's not, it's hard. There are days where it's hard.
Yep.
And, because you're dealing with people when you hear their stories, they're shedding a tear while they're telling you their story, and they're, and things, just because they're here and it's a better place, it's still not easy.
Right.
And so they're telling you some of the struggles they're going through. So you're hearing about, you're not necessarily, we only have one licensed full-time clinician, for our mental health, but all of our people play a role of just being listeners for these people and what they're going through. And if you don't have that ear and that love for people, it's not the right place for you.
No, and when you look at just showing up at the airport doesn't remove or change any of the previous trauma, any of the previous experiences. Like, you still have those things, especially if you're coming from a conflict-riddled nation. Like, we know what we call it.
Yeah.
Every war has called it a different thing. For Vietnam era, World War II was shell shocked, and now we call it PTSD and different things. And the thing with like our service members that would go to Afghanistan, who'd do a rotation, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then come home, right? People from nations like live conflict every single day of their life. Some of the worst atrocities that you could imagine, they've just lived it. Some born and just it's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
And they need not people that can understand, because nobody can understand what somebody from a nation like that has went through. Nobody can understand what walking 3 months across a desert and then living in a camp for 7 years before you're able to be free. Nobody can understand that. But to listen.
Yeah. Or like the African gentleman that I was talking to another time, and said, most of these African families come and have large families. I said, is there a particular reason that you guys all like to have large families? He goes, yes, it's important to have a large family so that, so that when they're grown up, that you have some of them left. I mean, when did you ever think that way?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I need to have 6 or 7 or 8 kids, so hopefully 2 of them see adulthood.
Right.
It's like,
that's wild.
Yeah. I mean, statements like that, or the gentleman who, he and his wife were very successful in Iraq, and said to them, been here about 6 months. I said, what do you like about being here? And he goes, well, I like to know that that my wife can go to the grocery store and I don't have to worry about her getting blown up.
Yeah.
I mean, who thinks that way?
Right.
Nobody in our country.
Right.
And so, I mean, it just, like I said, the reality of what the rest of the world is here. And, I'm not powerful enough to do this, nor do I ever expect that I will be. But if I could make it so every young man and young woman that graduates from high school would spend that next summer in a third world country somewhere, I think 90% of the things we argue about and say are wrong with our country, when they see the way people live in other countries, they'd all go away.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't prove that because nobody will let me pass that law.
Yeah. Well, no, and I'm going to go ahead and say that it's been proven. It's just not on the big scale. Anytime I've seen a young person go on their first mission trip, when they come back, it's a different human being that comes back.
It rocks their world.
God starts to move things. When you have to, YouTube probably won't censor this, but when you got to poop in a bucket for the first time, and you've lived with, indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
It was so crazy when, and I tell this story often, when we first arrived in Afghanistan, in Kandahar, specifically Kandahar International Airport. Still had, Kandahar International Airport riddled with bullet holes. And the vast majority of these bullet holes were from when the Soviets invaded in the early 80s. Okay. So
Never been repaired.
Never been repaired. There was still Soviet era aircraft, helicopters and jets that had just been rusting away on the airfield, just laying there. But we walked through the international airport.
Right.
You've been Colorado. I've been to Colorado
Okay,
Airport
yeah.
not too long
Yep.
ago, and it was beautiful.
Yep.
Right. There's not one stick of indoor plumbing in this international airport. You figure I hadn't functioned as an international airport since the 80s, but I know that in the United States of America we had indoor plumbing in the 80s.
Yep.
Right. But so many places don't have those very basic things that we just go when we hit flush or we turn the water on, and it's crazy.
Yeah.
Just to think about. Yeah, I think it's important for young people to get a different perspective, just to see, old people too, if you've never been anywhere, just to see just how blessed we are. Because I think you're right. The vast majority of things that we argue about and are divided on, I think we had a lot more in common, in that we do have the ability to be free, to create, to dream,
Yeah.
without hindrance.
And anybody who's experienced what we're just talking about here, if they start complaining about somebody, you can look at them and go, is that a first world problem or a third world problem? And they usually go, well, yeah, it's really not so bad, is it? Because they understand. We need reminders sometimes of that perspective.
Oh, we do. We did a verse of the day this morning from Second Philippians, which was, basically, don't complain.
Yeah.
Don't complain.
Well, and I would, outside of, being obedient to what God has laid in front of us, one of the things that I think it's important to recognize, not all people who call themselves Christ followers read their Bible on a real regular basis,
Sure.
so they don't really know the themes that are throughout it. But a constant theme throughout the Old Testament is God's heart towards the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. The foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. It shows up in so many stories, in so many places. And, it doesn't come out and say this, but my opinion on that is that because God loves the vulnerable people in our societies.
Sure.
And he cares about the vulnerable people in our societies. And the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan are on that list of vulnerable people in society.
Absolutely.
And so that's when we take care of the people that are on God's heart like that, we're doing kingdom work. We're doing the work that when Jesus said, the famous sheep and the goats line, and he says, when I came to you and I was thirsty, did you give me anything to drink? I was naked, did you give me any clothes and stuff? He's talking about the vulnerable people in our society. Are we serving them? Are we making sure that, that their needs are, that they're getting loved on?
Yep.
And so, I mean, I'm for anyone who wants to walk along and serve the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan, because that's God's heart.
Yep. Well, because we are in a world, the what's in it for me.
Yep.
When you begin to serve and love on the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan, you are loving and serving groups of people that can't give you anything.
Yep.
Can't give you anything.
Yeah. That's why it is such a privilege when you get invited over to have tea.
Yep.
Because that tea didn't cost them much at all, but it meant a lot for them.
Yep.
And and for some of them too, they of the things that they bring over in that suitcase, it has all their belongings in it. A nice tea set is pretty common in that.
Yeah.
And to where it's just 4 or 5 of the nice teacups and the the nice. I mean, it's just it's interesting to see. And then but you can tell by those things, what's important. Well, that hospitality, that having somebody into your home and sharing a cup of tea, those are fun things.
Yeah. Because it's not the tea; it's the time.
Yes, exactly.
It's the time. It's the time. Well, sir, it's been an absolute blessing
It's
to
been my
have you here
pleasure.
today. I appreciate it. If you could do me a favor, and for everybody that's watching, take a big, long look in that camera and tell everybody how they can connect with you.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, it's 2 separate organizations, one that takes care of people in their first 90 days in country, and that is first90.org. That's the word first, the number 90.org. And there's information on the organization, and there's a donate button in there too, if I might say so.
Please do.
And then the other organization that serves them without restriction after that original 90 days in country is beyond90.org, and that is the word beyond number 90.org. And both of those, we do have we do have Facebook pages, Beyond 90 and First 90 also, and would love for you to follow along and just see what God's doing in our little corner of the world. And if you've got any questions, both of those websites have contact us forms, and you can fill those out, and I'll gladly sit down and have a cup of coffee with you. And would love to get to know anybody who's questions, and would welcome those.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, sir. I appreciate it. And thank you for watching this episode of the Will Podcast. We hope that we have been able to share with you some wisdom, inspiration, leadership, and legacy. And I just want to encourage you today to take a step forward to walk in His will. Be blessed. See you soon. Bye.